Hi, I'm Rochelle, and you're listening to Box F1 Pod. Today we're discussing the Australian Grand Prix, aka the wildest shiz that's ever happened. But before we dive into all that drama, and there is a lot, it's time for a very quick digital warm-up. Lap 1, post-Jeddah. So a quick update on what happened with the whole FIA sponsor fiasco at the end of the last Grand Prix. George did in fact fly home with the trophy, but it did end up giving us some great banter on social between George and Fernando and the teams. First, Fernando tweeted back at George's P3 announcement with a picture of himself that's it looks like it's from the POV of a peephole or an eye hole in a door, so his forehead is really stretched out, and the caption was "Hola," and then the emojis of a trophy and then giving it back. And then a couple of days later, George posted a picture of himself holding the trophy at the factory and wrote, "What's your address, Fernando?" And Fernando replied with a bunch of laughing, crying emojis and wrote, "Grande Jorge." Why is George being called Jorge by Fernando so amusing to me? Same name, but it's something about imagining Fernando literally addressing George as Jorge in real life makes me laugh. Anyways, after that, the Mercedes team posted a video of George shining his trophy and then giving it to a Merc team member and being like, "Can you drop this off for me?" And then the Merc team member gets into the car and buckles up the trophy and maps the Aston Martin factory, which is a 15-minute drive, and takes the trophy over and puts it on their little shelf. It was very entertaining content. I'm glad they were able to make this whole mess into a funny situation, and no one took it too seriously. But yeah. In other news that are literally just random thoughts that I've had post Jeddah is that about Christian and Max, and I know I talked a lot about Jos Verstappen and how much he sucks. And I know there's a new Max documentary that's coming out or came out on Sunday or something about his journey, which I'm sure will only just prove everyone's opinion on Jos and that he sucks. But one thing I've thought about a lot is that I used to always make fun of Christian about how he would look at Max with such love in his eyes and he was always trying to hug him, and the hugginess seemed so over the top. But now that I'm thinking back to it, he's actually just a very warm and caring father figure for Max, and I feel Max never knew how to handle it, especially at the beginning. But Max didn't know what to make of it, probably because he never experienced that at home. And so when Christian cared about him and showed affection and built him up, it was probably a bit of a strange situation for him. But I think seeing the contrast between how Christian responded to Max's P2 in Jeddah and how Jos responded to Max's P2, it just became super apparent. Christian is not going to be dropping Max off at a gas station in the rain ever. I don't think the thought would even cross his mind. And I think he's actually a very important and grounding figure in Max's life that not enough people give him credit for. I think, yeah, Jos made Max into a champion, I guess, but you do need to foster talent and you do need to show people love and care and affection. And I think Christian does that for Max. So he actually plays a huge role in who Max is. Anyway, I love Christian. I know that's a controversial take, and I love Max. Also a controversial take, but this just made me this added an emotional depth to them that I had never really thought about before. All right, lap 2, jet lag tutorials and just Australia stuff. So first off, I've always wondered how the drivers handle stuff like jet lag. I remember reading one time Lewis saying that he starts eating meals at the time of the place he's going, a couple days in advance, which sounds very complicated to me. Especially when they have double headers. That seems like a toughie to execute on. But that was the only tidbit we really got. Oh, also he takes melatonin, but that's a boring tidbit. So when Carlos, the analytical king that he is, decided to share his jet lag journey and posted like a how-to guide. I literally went crazy. So I am going to read out Carlos's step-by-step instructions on how he personally handles jet lag. So first he said, I have to stay awake during this first flight, so I'm going to explain to you how a good jet lag plan works when you travel to Australia. Then he said, first flight, 7 hours to Dubai. It's a tough one. It's 8 a.m. in Melbourne, so it's important not to sleep. Plenty of caffeine is allowed, but most importantly, plenty of light exposure. Keep the reading lights on, watch a film and entertain yourself. Quick visits to the bar, and have a few conversations with your colleagues works also. It's 10:30 in Europe, so it will not be easy. 2 hours stopover in Dubai, probably in a zombie state after staying awake all night, but it's important to keep making an effort. Never sleep and focus on staying in bright places with plenty of sun or artificial light. Have your last bit of caffeine if it helps. It'll be 7 a.m. in Europe, afternoon in Melbourne. Then he posted a picture of a movie he's watching, wrote guess the film, and I really wish I knew what movie this was, but I do not know what movie it is. Also, just private jet life. He has like a full cappuccino. He has like a damp towelette. And like a full screen TV. What a life. Then he posted a picture of like the window on the plane at 5:31 and wrote surviving, period. Then he posted a picture of the window at the airport and wrote light with an emoji light bulb. Next slide is a picture of his passport on the plane, and it says, jet lag update, flight Dubai, Melbourne, 12 hours. Managed to keep staying awake 2 hours and then sleep for 10 hours as I was destroyed. Landing in Melbourne at 7 a.m. and the plan will be to stay awake all day. Plenty of light exposure, maybe some golf if weather is good, and some paddle or running along the river. Past experience tells me that at 7 p.m. I'll be dead and wanting to go to sleep, but I will try my best. Then he posted a picture of Melbourne and wrote, hey! And then he posted a picture of himself playing squash. And one thing I've realized about all of these drivers is that turns out when they have time off, they don't not play sports. They just play other sports all the time. And I think once Carlos landed in Australia, his main strategy was to just play every sport humanly possible. So we know he played squash. We don't know if he made it past 7 p.m. He never updated us. But I will give him the benefit of the doubt and say he did make it past 7 p.m. and past that game of squash. Carlos, in addition to the squash, we also got a glimpse of him and Lando on a helicopter ride, and then they played golf. And I'm not sure yet still if they took the helicopter to the golf or if those were two separate activities. Both wild. I don't know why they were in a helicopter. But quick side note relating to golf, there was a clip of Alex at some event in Melbourne talking about who's the best golf player on the grid, and he said that the only person he hasn't played is Carlos, but he suspects that he's actually the best. Apparently he's beaten Lando every time he's played him. Also related to golf, and the most bizarre thing that I think definitely didn't see coming was Lewis and Lando played golf together. Not only did Lewis and Lando play golf together, Lewis also shared it to his Instagram grid. That is like major steps. I saw a clip of Lando talking about it on one of his live streams, and he was almost like giggling about it. He was like, I was at the golf course, and then Lewis shows up. And he's like, oh my god, Lando, what are you doing here? Want to play golf with us? And Lando's like, wasn't gonna say no. Duh. So he played golf with Lewis. Lewis took a selfie and it made it on his Instagram. Whenever Lewis interacts with the other drivers in any capacity, even if it was an accidental run-in, which by the way makes more sense than a planned activity, but I just love when Lewis is seen like interacting and hanging out and having fun with the other drivers. It makes me happy. Like, you don't have to be friends with your coworkers. I guess they're coworkers, but it's nice. It's nice to see. Other jet lag activities included Nick DeVries' trainer posted a picture of them playing chess and captioned it, jet lag plus chess, true practice of brain endurance. Side note, I hope he gets a chance to play with Charles and Carlos, who I just always think about them in chess. because of that one time at the Belgian Grand Prix when we were red flagged for like ages, and they zoomed in on Carlos and Charles sitting next to each other on their phones, and the commentators were like, "Oh, the generation these days, right next to each other, and they're not even talking." And then we found out later they were just playing each other in chess. Love that. Another big activity that literally every single driver seemed to do was like become a Melbourne tourist, but it was specifically to Hosier Lane, which is like this alleyway, this really famous alleyway in Melbourne that's covered in graffiti that apparently changes like regularly. I don't know why I said graffiti. Graffiti that changes regularly. I swear to God, every single driver popped by that lane and took a picture. Charles, Lando, Logan, I can't even remember everyone, but an Australian box DM'd me and said that about Hosier Lane and how it's like a really popular tourist destination. And another Australian box DM'd me saying that it literally always smells like urine, so it is almost always avoided by locals, which just made me laugh. Like, of course, the driver just picked a random smelly tourist trap, snapped a photo, and left. Anyway, speaking of Hosier Lane and taking pictures, Charles posted a picture of himself there with a camera, and then during some event later, he was asked if he was planning on starting a JPEG account, to which both Charles and Carlos looked extremely confused as to what a .jpeg account was. And then the host was like, "Oh, it's the Lando thing," and they're like, "Oh," and Charles was like, "I actually have one. It's private though because I'm bad." And he's like, "Maybe one day I'll make it public, but it's currently all black and white and I'm not a good photographer." But he does have a JPEG account, which I love. I do feel like though I shit on him a little bit, and I do need to give credit where credit's due. Lando did start, I think, the whole JPEG trend, at least the public facing .jpeg trend. It was one of his many hobbies that he discovered last year, which also included DJing. Which sadly, it seems like is no longer a thing. He has gone on record to say his DJ career is over. Very sad. It was a very short-lived hobby. I really wondered how long he was going to manage traveling with his entire DJ set to every race. But he's given it up, and I really do wonder what he'll dabble in next. I hope he keeps up this, like, hobby momentum that he's had going, even if DJing is a thing of the past. Also completely unrelated, but as it turns out, Valtteri's mullet that he's been sporting all year wasn't as mullety as it could have been. Turns out it could have been more of a mullet, because when he landed in Australia, he got it updated. I don't even know how to describe it. It's like a mullet now. And he put on a bro tank and flip-flops, or thongs as they call them in Australia, and just like walked around with a beer. Like, I don't understand how someone can simultaneously like emulate Aussie vibes but still be so Finnish. And as thrilled as I am to see Valtteri living his best as thrilled as I am to see Valtteri living his best life, both like aesthetically and emotionally, I do have to agree with Guan Yu, who said this weekend that he doesn't understand it, like the whole mullet thing. He's like, he's doing it and it's cool, but like I don't understand. I love it. I love Valtteri and the like journey he's on, but I too do not understand it. Okay, another thing I quickly wanted to talk about was the Pierre and Esteban cook-off that was forced on them by Alpine. So Jack Doohan, who I discovered in Jeddah and who I'm now obsessed with, is Alpine's reserve driver, and since he's Australian, he was a great choice to host an Aussie burger cook-off between Pierre and Esteban. In other words, he was the obvious choice for a human shield to stand between Esteban and Pierre, who I believe are only cordial to each other as long as they're not forced to directly interact with the other person. So basically he showed them a picture of like the burgers they're supposed to make, and Esteban is reading like the intro card that is like describing the instructions for this activity, and Jack is listening to him. They're kind of joking with each other, and Pierre literally just keeps interrupting to make jokes to Jack about the stuff that Esteban is reading, but not really acknowledging Esteban or the fact that it's Esteban like reading all of this. And he like is giving such like younger sibling energy where he's like constantly tapping like, look at me, pay attention to me. And it's not like I think Jack might be closer to Esteban because they've known each other longer, I think. But in general, like both of them were trying to get Jack's attention from the other person. And just like a very quick side note that's like not necessarily related, but Esteban told Jack that he only cooks eggs in the microwave, which is appalling and not something you should ever share with people. He's French. He should have respect for food and cuisine. Anyway, so this entire video is just like hilarious to watch in terms of the dynamics because like Jack is straight up in the middle. Esteban and Pierre do not really acknowledge each other. They might like react to something the other person has said, but they will not address the other person. They only address Jack. In the end, Jack gave the win to Pierre and then gave the design award to aesthetic award whatever to Esteban for presentation because Esteban had like a limp piece of lettuce on his plate and Jack was like, is that for the burger? And Esteban's like, no, it's for decoration. It's a decoration. What do you mean? So the limp piece of lettuce won him presentation, but Jack also made all of these decisions without actually trying the burgers, and he got bullied into trying the burgers by Pierre and Esteban, and Pierre still won on taste, but they were all like dying because Jack was so scared that he was about to gain too much weight and like be over the limit for the race the next day, but he literally had like a quarter of a bite from each burger. Maybe that was a front for not wanting to eat their burgers because he didn't trust them to cook it acceptably. But regardless, it's like wild that they have to be so careful about their weights. Like one bite of a burger and they're done for. Like Fernando must struggle with that way more than the younger drivers because he's old and has a slower metabolism. So he must really have to watch everything he puts in his mouth. That's wild. Anyway, that's a fun watch if you just want to see the like incredibly awkward dynamic between Pierre and Esteban. And if you just want to watch Jack. Which I did. All right, lap 3, the Australia race weekend. So this was a little before the race weekend, but I need to acknowledge Alex's birthday. He turned 27 a couple of weeks ago, and I was super excited to bring back the cake off where I ranked the paddock birthday cakes, which I think is a very important activity to do in order to determine the relationship between driver and team and kitchen. Like, I think the cake that a driver gets says a lot about who they are in relation to the team. And I actually, so Alex's cake looks like a carrot cake type situation. It's like a 1-layer sheet type cake. It looks like very homey. But like, I like it because when they're like this, when they're sort of like, when they look like a home chef made them, it feels like it's a favorite of his. It feels like they know this is his favorite type of cake. And also I like it because it looks edible. And it's not just like 30 pounds of fondant. Like, it's just, no one wants to eat that. Like last year, Alex got one of those fondant cakes and it had like him on it. And that was fun and all, but like, I think it's like way less impersonal. Like, yeah, you could go crazy with the design, but surely the cake is what matters, not what you put on the cake. And I also think it showed how he was new to the team back then, so he was not as close to them. But this year, they're much closer. They're more like a family, so like the cake reflects that sort of relationship. Anyway, I give like 9 out of 10 for this cake because it looks like it tasted good and it looks like Alex would have enjoyed it. Also, completely irrelevant side note, but Lily's photo dump for Alex's birthday was incredibly wholesome, and there was one picture of Alex in like a Hawaiian shirt type thing, but it was all Pokemon, and it just reminds me what a dork he is, and I love it. All right, quickly, some FIA changes that are being discussed or instated during this race weekend. One is that they made the grid boxes bigger, which was a huge issue the first 2 races with both Esteban and Fernando getting a penalty for lining up outside the grid box. We had no penalties for it this week, and I guess that's because the drivers could actually see where they were lining up rather than guessing and hoping for the best. It's wild to see the FIA implement some changes that matter and that people ask for. Who knew? They like listened to the suggestion box. Another major change is that there are no more team celebrations up on the fence. The FIA is claiming safety as a concern, but I think this is so weird. Like, that moment is so iconic, and the entire team is cheering for the driver, like, as he crosses the finish line. And it's, like, such a big part of F1 and, like, team camaraderie, and also, like, it's just an iconic image to see, like, them all hanging over the fence. But the FIA, I guess, is concerned that someone might fall off the fence or like a piece of debris might hit them. Like, has that actually happened? Don't they need some sort of like evidence to back up like random changes like this? Like, has a front wing flown off a car and whacked an engineer in the face as someone's crossing the finish line and I missed it? Like, what triggered this rule change? It just feels like very random and annoying. Like, make changes that actually matter and are consistently an issue that people complain to you about, like the grid boxes. There are so many things that you could be focusing on right now, and if you need a list, you can send one over to Stu, because this is not the primary concern, unless I'm like missing something and like an engineer died by hanging off the fence. But I feel like that hasn't happened. Another big topic of conversation this weekend was changes to the format of the weekend, which I think might be more in the territory of like F1 decisions rather than which is like Stefan Domenicali, rather than the FIA, which is Mohammed. And I'm still trying to fully understand all the changes, but I think the biggest two agenda items are reducing the number of practice sessions to just one before qualifying, which would shorten the race weekend, I think, to Friday to Sunday. And I believe that this is pretty popular amongst the drivers. A lot of them were saying that they don't need that many practices, and also that F2 and F3 only have one practice session, and that should be sufficient for F1 as well. The second item is specific to sprint weekends. I believe they want to have qualifying on Friday to determine the Sunday start grid. And then on Saturday, they would have a sprint qualifying followed immediately by a sprint race. So word is that most teams are on board with this idea. And I think it might be first tested out in Baku, but I'm not 100% sure. Personally, I understand that this might resolve the concern that many people had about maintaining the value of qualifying and the pole position as it relates to the actual race. Like, a lot of people thought that the sprint race sort of diminished the value of pole position. And I get that. I also get that they want constant entertainment, but I struggle to see the fluidity in this format. It makes it feel like Saturday is like completely random and unrelated to the rest of the weekend. I feel like each day should build on each other. It just feels like kind of disjointed to me, and it feels like Saturday is like a complete waste of time. Like, it's fun to watch, but like there's no purpose to it. So it's just kind of and I'm not entirely sure which issue this is regarding. I'm pretty sure this is just towards the sprint format changes. But Max is not like into it at all. Like, he says he doesn't need the sprint races because to him it's just wasting car potential for Sunday. Like, he's not like going crazy. He's trying to save the car so it can do the maximum on Sunday. And he thinks that Sunday is the most important day and it should remain that way. It's just so wild how the media twists everything. Like, all of the articles saying that Max is threatening to quit F1 over the format changes is a bit dramatic. I'm pretty sure he just said he's like unhappy with it. Like, Max is pretty purist when it comes to F1. He loves the race kind of as it is, and honestly, I kind of agree with him. I think it makes sense for it to build. It doesn't make sense for Friday to do something for Sunday and then Saturday being like something else. It just doesn't really make sense. Okay, another great thing that I loved this weekend was a comedian named Troy Hawk, who I did not know until this weekend, and this video was stationed in like a silk smoking jacket, like purple velvet, at the front of the paddock, and was just greeting F1 drivers and principals. And I want to repeat the entire video, but I'm just going to call out some of my favorites of how he greeted the drivers and team principals. So to George, he said, "I didn't recognize you with your shirt on." To Pierre, who was wearing an all-white outfit, he said, "You are a sartorial explosion of cream." I literally choked hearing this. Pierre literally only took away explosion of cream and repeated it back to him in like bewildered amusement. To Yuki, he said, "Your stature is small, but your aura is staggering," which honestly is a very accurate way to describe Yuki. To Toto, he said, "Fever dream of choice for the discerning housewife," which Toto, like, you could see Toto processing it, and then he, like, asked to, like, I don't know, no one at all, like, "What's a discerning housewife?" And then Toto came back from wherever he was going, like, this was clearly eating him up inside, and he asked Troy, "What's a discerning housewife?" And Troy responded, "A discerning housewife is someone who is particular and discriminatory in their choice of fever dream." To which Toto went, "Oh." It's a very accurate way to describe Toto, but it's just funny. To Charles, he said, "You have an untroubled swing in your walk," which I'm only noting because Charles most certainly does have a troubled swing in his walk. It's not untroubled in the least, but we won't talk about it now. To Alex, he says, "Racing car glamour out the wazoo," which is really the only way to describe F1, and I'm sad I never came up with it on my own. Great phrase. To Valtteri, he said, "That head is magnificent. You're ready for Monaco or Benidorm," which, after further investigation, aka Googling Benidorm, I realized it's like a Mallorca type situation, like it's in Spain and known for clubbing, which honestly seems accurate for what's happening on Valtteri's head. To Zach Brown, he said, "Sir Ray Winston, I adore your movies." And I looked it up because I didn't know who Ray Winston is, and literally it's uncanny. He looks exactly like Zach Brown. It was wild. And Zach laughed like he's heard this before. I don't know how I've like missed this, but it is literally his twin. To Christian Horner, he said, "You're like Daniel Craig if he were a cricket umpire." I think the best part of this is how unimpressed Christian was. He was like, "Okay." And anyway, yeah, that was Troy Hawk. And I'm obsessed with him now. The greetings were excellent. If he's able to come up with a new one every race, he should be a permanent fixture at the paddock entrance. All right, and now let's talk about the man of the hour, the greatest person to ever grace planet Earth, Daniel Ricciardo. Truly probably the best part of this weekend was seeing him around again and like all of the content we were blessed with. Like, first of all, Red Bull is milking Daniel's likability, charisma, and like marketing capabilities for all it's worth. He did some interview rounds for Red Bull, and some of my favorite questions were, "Have you seen all the stuff online about, oh, he has as many points as Oscar and Lando?" To which Daniel very gallantly feigned shock at and was like, "No, I haven't seen that," but he did crack a smile. Also, he was on a radio show, was asked about his friendship with Harry Styles, to which he said that Harry's team had sent him some of Harry's skin products, but that was the extent of their relationship. And then he was asked about his thoughts on Harry and Emily Ratajkowski making out in Japan, and he was shocked. He was shown the video, and he said Harry had not told him about it, but he was very happy for them. He's like, good for them. Which is true. It is good for them. He also filmed a lot of content with Max and Checo, and it was great to see him working with them. He makes everything so chill, and he brings out the best in Max. Like, Max is at his peak when Daniel's around. He's so relaxed. He's making jokes. Like, Max is trying to be funny. And when Daniel laughs, Max never looks more pleased than when Daniel laughs at his jokes. And Checo is like, Daniel is so, like, non-clicky that, like, it doesn't feel like Checo's out of place. Like, it feels like a good balance between the three, even though he's closer to Max. Also, by the way, the camera people during the race quickly realized what Drive to Survive and Red Bull already know, which is that the only way to get people hyped is to just have Daniel on camera. Every time they zoomed in on Daniel in the garage, the crowd literally went insane, and Daniel could literally hear and like process that he was on camera, so he'd like smile and wave every time. Another incredible moment that I must mention is Christian's description of having Daniel back on the team. Christian was asked about Daniel, and it just warms my heart the way he talks about him. Daniel's just a positive energy to have around. It's great to see him getting his mojo back and to see that big smile on his face, and he lights up a room when he walks in. You know, his popularity in Formula One, even though he's not driving, he's still probably the most popular driver here. And for us, it's just positive to have him on the team, contributing to the drivers, to the engineering team, and hopefully he'll rediscover his love for the sport. He'll do a bit of testing for us later in the year, and yeah, we'll see how that goes for him. I think it's a different experience. It must be really tough for him not being a racing driver this year, but he's embracing his new role. And when he was asked how race ready Daniel was, if should he have to like sub in for Max or Checo, Christian says, I'd say he's about 10 minutes away from being ready. He's in good shape. He's kept himself fit and well. We've had to feed him up a bit. I don't know what you guys did to him, looking at Zach Brown, but he came back really skinny, but he's looking healthier now. He's training hard and he's ready to go given the chance. Like, Christian describing Daniel as like an abused stray animal that he has to nurse back to health, and like all these habits he's picked up at McLaren and how it's changed, like he's a completely different person and driver to what he remembered, is hilarious because Zach Brown is sitting right next to him and the shade is insane. Like, and it feels true. Like, no one really recognized Daniel the way he was at McLaren. So I'm really happy he's back in the loving, warm embrace of Red Bull, and I hope it stays that way. Well, I hope he has a seat, but I'm glad he's there right now. Okay, and that brings me to Checo, because another thing Christian was asked were his thoughts about Checo, saying that until Checo joined the team only ran 2 cars because they were obligated to, which is a bold statement from Checo. And Christian was clearly completely thrown off guard and said that he didn't even know Checo said that, and then just like rambled on about always having 2 cars racing and naming all the driver pairings they've had. He did not look pleased by Checo's comments. Also, earlier last week, a quote from Checo dropped saying that I really believe I have the team's full support and every opportunity to win the championship as much as Max. And obviously, like, the comments are just like fully roasting him. And, like, I love Checo, and I think he deserves the full support of the team. I think he's worthy of fighting for the championship. But, like, does he have the support and the same, like, unequivocal support that Max does? Like, deserving it and having it are 2 different things, you know? Like, I don't know if he necessarily has it in the same way that Max does. Like, the reason Checo's always been such a great asset to Red Bull is because he's always recognized his place. Like, he can compete, he can be an excellent driver, but he is the supporting actor in this play. But, like, that has clearly shifted a bit, and like towards the end of last year and toward the beginning of this year, like he seems hell-bent on beating Max. And these comments that he's making are concerning me a bit, that he's getting a bit over cocky, and I'm afraid he's going to end up being his own worst enemy, and Red Bull will get tired of his attitude, because as great of a driver as Checo is, and as much as he might deserve a proper shot at winning, he's not Max, and he's at Red Bull. So, like, eventually the team will have to choose one way or another, and they're choosing Max. They will literally always choose Max. They will choose Max until Max doesn't choose them, is basically what it is. Which is, on one hand, unfair to Checo, but he was such a big hit because he got that. He knew what the situation was when he came in. But it becomes harder when he feels like he's great and he also wants to win. So anyway, I'm a little apprehensive of how things are going to unfold, but it'll be interesting to see the dynamics at Red Bull in the upcoming year. Also, some very quick celeb sightings this weekend. Kylie Minogue was there, which I feel like if you're from the United States, you don't know who that is. I only found out about her when I was at uni, but she's like this huge Australian pop star, so everyone was very excited to see her. Also, not really a celebrity, but Michael Massey was at the Grand Prix. I miss the guy, if I'm honest. Like, he was so messy. Like, he caused so much drama. It was a very exciting addition to the paddock, and we had the radio messages at the time. And I think he got, like, he gets, like, way too much hate for a decision that was definitely not made exclusively by him. So I'm not team hate Michael Massey. I'm team love Michael Massey, especially how happy and healthy he looks. He looks like a weight's been lifted off his shoulders. He looks like he's actually enjoying his life for a change. So I say, go Michael. I hope you enjoyed your first Grand Prix back. Also, Scotty James was there, and honestly, he's quickly becoming one of my favorite TikTok personalities. And if you don't know who Scotty is, he's an Olympic snowboarder from Australia. He's a Red Bull athlete. He's also best friends with Daniel, and he's engaged to be married to Chloe Stroll, aka Lance's sister, aka Lawrence's daughter. It's like such a wild, unexpected crossover of like BFFs with Daniel, but also I hang out with Lance's family. Anyway, he's a fun follow. And because he's a Red Bull athlete and like Daniel's friend, there's like double allegiance to his family's team and future family's team and his employer. Also, most importantly, cousin Greg was at the Grand Prix. Nicholas Braun of Succession fame, but if you're an OG fan like me, you'll remember him from Sky High as that kid who glowed up, I think, or maybe he became long. I think he glowed. He was also in Minutemen and Princess Protection Program. Shout out DComs. He was also in a TV remake of 10 Things I Hate About You. Don't know if anyone saw that one, but now that I've listed half of his IMDb page, you're welcome. You know who he is, and I was very excited to see him. He like popped up in the back of a Scotty James interview, like walking by, and I was like, pause. What? Also, I was very excited when Christian posted a picture with him on his story and just like hashtag Succession. Also, Nicholas Braun shared a picture of him and Christian on the grid, joking about helping with strategy. But like the picture itself was highly comical because Christian is 5'8" and Nicholas Braun is 6'7". By the way, does anyone else think that cousin Greg is going to bring it home? Like, he's going to confuse everyone with the awkward gangly act, and then bam, he'll succeed? Secede? Secede, the verb of succession? He's going to get it, you know? I feel like that's what's going to happen. I feel like it's out of left field. Cousin Greg's going to win it all. Anyway, lap 4 paddock fits. Okay, so like I don't know what was happening in Australia, but there were some wild outfits going on. Beyond our usual favorites, Lewis and Guan Yu, I actually took a poll on several outfits, so we'll talk about those outfits for sure, but I'll also shout out some honorable mentions. First, the patterned like denim fits that Guan Yu and Lewis sported. Lewis is wearing like a bright green, pink, blue, and black zebra print cargo pants and jacket. Guan Yu, on the other hand, is wearing like a denim jacket, denim pants that are like a pastel watercolor type of situation that are like pinks and blues, and it has this like abstract man and woman drawn on it, which honestly I thought were JFK and Marilyn, but I don't know. And then he has like 2 big denim pockets, one on the jacket and one on the pants. So TikTok voted 55% for Lewis and 45% for Guan Yu, but Instagram voted 56% for Guan Yu and 44% for Lewis. I mean, objectively speaking, they're all wrong. Guan Yu wins without a question. He's like effortlessly cool. It's not too crazy, you know, like it's fun and different, but it's not like wild. Lewis's outfit, on the other hand, reminds me of that quote from Princess Diaries when Lana asks Jeremiah if the sweater was made for him or if the knitting machine just exploded. And that was when Mia combed Lana. And I was like, Lana got combed because of that insult, but it was a good insult. It was an ugly sweater. I'm just not a fan of the colors on Lewis's outfit. I do want to say, though, quickly, that Lewis had some other great fits all weekend. He had a very cool Tommy Hilfiger jacket and like a really fun Kenzo jacket. And then he went with another Zegna Elder Statesman collab set that looked really cool on him. And I think I loved Lewis's outfits more this weekend because there were other people dressing up, so it felt less like out of place. And also, it's much cooler in Melbourne, so it wasn't as like painful to look at temperature wise. But yeah, he had some great outfits this weekend, but this zebra fit was not it. Side note, Guan Yu finally revealed his boba order during an interview, and it is a classic milk tea. I love that for him. It's like cool, effortless, chill, just like Wang Yu. Fits perfectly. Next up, I literally just pulled pants on our favorite duo, Gasanoda. Like, let me tell you, there was a lot going on down under, and that's a joke I will continue to make. Pierre is wearing like these baggy cargo snake print pants that are like grayish white, and Yuki is wearing like more slim fit, hot pink cargo pants. TikTok voted 68% for Yuki and 32% for Pierre, and Instagram actually voted the exact same. And in this case, I think everyone is correct. Yuki objectively looks exceptional. And Pierre, even though he still like drips coolness, like those pants are just not it. But I do think that these two outfits say a lot about the personal growth of both drivers. So like let's look at Yuki. When he started, he dressed like very humbly, very simply. It's easy to keep it conservative when you're only able to wear AlphaTauri, but like Pierre clearly built him up and encouraged him to become more confident in himself as a person, as a driver, as a fashion icon. And towards the end of Gasanoda, during the off season and like the beginning of this season, we've seen Yuki's fashion game just get bigger and better. Like off season, we got to see some non-AlphaTauri fits that were so good, and now we're seeing him like push the envelope even with the AlphaTauri restrictions. And that's totally reflective of Yuki taking like a leadership role within the team, which I knew he was going to do. I think he feels like way more confident than he did when he started. And even when Pierre was still on the team, because he has to stand on his own now, hot pink pants and all. And I just love that for him. Yuki's really blossoming. It's amazing. Pierre, on the other hand, is like living life outside the Red Bull fold for the first time, I want to say, like in his career. Like, this is a new chapter for him, and he's going to be taking risks and relishing in his newfound freedom. And part of that freedom is not being forced to only wear AlphaTauri, which apparently has translated into experimenting with like very wild pant choices. Now, none of this like takes away Pierre's like it factor. He could like wear the ugliest clothes and it still just radiates coolness. But these pants were just not my favorite. But I still support Pierre experimenting with his fashion. Like, go crazy, dude. Love it all. And on that note, we've concluded our digital warm-up. Do.
On to the race rhyme.
We're going to the land down under with Danny Rick and also Gunther. From Valtteri's mullet to driving rockin' pants with wild style, Melbourne vibes were more out of pocket than Emrata and Harry Styles. Maybe it was Daniel's return, or maybe it was just the jet lag, but it was pure chaos right up until the checkered flag. On Sunday, when the lights went out and away they went, Max gets passed by George, then Lewis going full send. But if you're feeling deja vu from a Mercedes 1-2 and need some regularly scheduled content, I got you. Charles is in the gravel before turn 3. Sad. At least Carlos will be okay, won't he? Barely a safety car later, and now it's Alex in the wall. Stews are like, ew, gravel! Red flag this shiz until we sleep it all. And because George pitted right before, Lewis is now in the lead. So when we kick off start number 2, Max is feeling the need for speed. Once he overtakes Lewis, we get a series of little events, so try to keep up, please. With a tap from Etsy, Nick goes flying, but both are able to proceed. Meanwhile, Pierre's in the top 5 driving super sleek, and George and Carlos are on an overtaking streak. But then, Russell's on fire, but Toto isn't terrified. Poor Georgie's engine was the little engine that died. Checo, on the other hand, is the overtake king, from P20 to the top 10 like it's an easy thing. Meanwhile, Fernando tries and fails to get Lewis to fuck up. Kevin, however, loses a tire as he hits the wall with a bump. The trigger-happy stews are like, this is definitely a red flag, as if causing a lag and collecting red flags is any reason to brag. With only 2 laps to go, surely start number 3 is the last. Lol, no sir, buckle up for a list of casualties amassed. Carlos tapped Fernando, who went spinning. Pierre and Esti Bestie collided, resulting in 2 crushed Alpines. Twinning! Lance is in the gravel. Boo! Oh hey, Checo's in the gravel too! And somewhere in the back, Logan butt taps Nick. Not even halfway through lap 1, and the Stews put out that red flag real quick. Back in the pit lane, there's more confusion than Gwyneth sipping bone broth at her prosecution. The FIA needs to decide if the race is over or going forward, and also they've got to figure out how the remaining drivers will be ordered. By the way, how many DNFs we got so far? Pop quiz. Charles, Alex, George, Kevin, Pierre, Esti, Nick, Logan, and that's it. The FIA decides on the OG order and to do 1 lap until the finish line. And they give Carlos a 5-second penalty, which is so not fine. Random aside, Lewis can touch his toes, and Fernando drags his own tires like he's one of the bros. So, 8 DNFs, 4 starts, and 3 red flags later, the race is over, and TBH, the relief couldn't be greater. Max, Lewis, and Fernando are on a podium of glory, because today, the Champs is for world champs only. It's a whole month until Baku. Only time will tell if this chaos will ensue. Okay, on to analysis. So I know last episode I gave a whole spiel about like not going chronologically, but there's literally no way to talk about this race without going chronologically. It was pure chaos from start to finish, and honestly, I know everyone in Europe was complaining they had to wake up at 7 a.m., but I had to watch this race at 10 p.m. at night, which is way worse for the record because I could barely focus on what was happening. The race was never ending, and I was just dying for like 2.5 hours. I woke up the next morning and I had to rewatch it all because I thought it was just like a fever dream. It wasn't. It actually all happened. So, anyways, we're going to start at the very beginning. Okay, so very quickly, a few key moments that happened during quali. Um, Checo ended up in the gravel and brought out the red flag in Q1. He had done the same thing in free practice, and the commentator was saying that at Checo's level, these kinds of mistakes are unacceptable. But on the radio, Checo seemed to have implied that it was a car issue that was persisting after free practice. So I guess he was probably right because the team ended up making a change to his suspension, which meant that he had to start from the pit lane, which honestly didn't matter because I think he was like last. And Valtteri, who also struggled a lot during qualifying, got some changes to his suspension as well and also ended up starting from the pit lane. The big story from qualifying, though, was that Mercedes somehow was insanely fast and managed to make it to the top three. George qualified P2 and Lewis qualified P3, which made for a totally not awkward top three photo op. Poor Max, he loves chattering away up there, like after qualifying, and this was just not his audience. There's like a video where it looked like he was about to talk, like he wanted to talk, and he turned to his right and realized it was Lewis next to him, and his mouth just like opened and closed. And I think he would talk to George if Lewis wasn't there, but I guess it's probably a bit more awkward when George's teammate is Lewis and he's standing right there. But I just always love how Max needs to debrief and just needs to like chatter away after the race, after qualifying. He just needs to talk it out. So anyway, the starting grid is as follows. Max, George, Lewis, Fernando, Carlos, Lance, Charles, Alex in Q3. Pierre, Nico, Esteban, Yuki, Lando, Kevin, Nick, Oscar, Guan Yu, and Logan. And then Valtteri and Checo were both starting from the pit lane. All right, on to the race. Let's dive into this chaos. I have sectioned the race into 8 sections, and at the end of each section, we're going to do a DNF count because trust me, it's necessary. Otherwise you'll just lose all sight of what's happening. So right at the start, we get drama. Max does not get off the line well, and although he maintains the lead for like just a bit, George overtakes him in like no time, and it is a brilliant overtake. Max is clearly a bit salty because he gets on the radio to complain that George pushed him off, but George was behind him, so he couldn't have pushed him off, and even Max sounds like he barely believes his own complaint. I think he just felt like he ought to complain about something. And then somehow Lewis overtakes Max, maybe because he was busy complaining, and now George is first and Lewis is second and Max is third, and it's all just looking bonkers and like we're in an alternate universe. But if you're like freaking out about how weird this all is, don't worry. Charles is here to bring some normalcy back into your life because when in fear of too many changes, Ferrari is always there to drown you in tears of your dreams and hopes being destroyed. Like literally by turn 3, Charles has somehow been tapped by Lance and he's beached in the gravel and his race is over. Literally, I think I blinked and Charles was on the back of a moped. Like, it's just sad. So sad, it almost makes me laugh at how sad it is. Like, dude cannot catch a break. So Charles's incident issues a safety car, which like weirdly triggers a string of pit stops, even though it's like lap 2. And just for the record, the DNF count after this safety car, which is lap 3, is 1, Charles. So when the race resumes, things seem okay. George is maintaining the lead on Lewis, but he's definitely starting to feel like the breath on his neck and he's getting a bit panicky. Not to fear though. Alex is here. Poor Alex, who had such a great qualifying and start to the race, spins into the wall in lap 7, causes a yellow flag, which quickly turns into a safety car. Poor Alex is out. George uses this opportunity to pit, and even though he like comes out P7, this seems like a great strategy call for him in the long run. Like, I think he's happy, the team's happy, everyone is pleased about this except Lewis, who is immediately on the radio complaining yet again that George pitting was like super unfair to him. Luckily for Lewis, though, the stewards decide that a safety car is like not enough time to clean up all this gravel. Like, it's too messy. They need to bring out the big guns, so they issue a full red flag. And even though they claim it's also to clean up other debris, it's pretty much to clean up the gravel, and everyone's pretty fucking annoyed. Other than Alex, though, the biggest loser from this was George, who ends up having to do a standing start from P6. And Lewis, who was complaining literally moments ago, is now leading the race and got a free pit stop to boot. Apparently the pit stop was necessary because when Lewis got out of his car, he like immediately checked the wing because apparently he was complaining that it took a hit against Max, but I don't even know when that would have happened. I must have missed something. Anyway, George is very annoyed. We see him talking to Toto, and we later hear a delayed radio call that he's like annoyed but not at the team. I think he actually loved that call. It's just the situation is annoying because it's just bad luck, and that's like perfectly understandable to be annoyed about it. So DNF count at the end of this red flag is Charles and Alex. 2. We have racked up 2 DNFs so far. Okay, so now at the restart, Max gets off a bit better this time than he did the first time, but it's still not great. So Lewis still has the lead. Well, it's okay, Max. Practice makes perfect. Little do you know, you're about to have a whole lot of practice. And the entire middle of this race wasn't the most exciting, which honestly I should have probably been more grateful for at the time. But here are like the main highlights. There were still some fun tidbits. So Ocon and Nick had contact that sent Nick literally flying into the air, but both remained intact enough to continue racing. Also, it didn't take very long for Max to overtake Lewis, who was holding on to the lead by literally less than a second. And once he's past Lewis and all that dirty air, Max literally unleashed the full force of the Red Bull and ends up like 10 seconds ahead, which is mostly wild considering where the Mercedes was last week. Like, even being within 10 seconds of Max is great. And the fact that they were leading him for a bit is also phenomenal. And some exciting news, Gasly was P4 until George overtook him, but then Pierre still managed to hold on to like the top 5 for ages, which was so great for him to like achieve in his Alpine. Carlos also overtook a bunch of people and lands in P6 behind Pierre. So they were both having pretty decent races. And then there's more drama because George's car literally just randomly catches fire and he has to pull over and scramble out. And it really like just reminds me of Donkey and Trek, where everyone's like, "You're on fire, Donkey." And he's like, "Thank you." And they're like, "No, you're really on fire." Toto's reaction, by the way, during this entire situation is comically calm. Like, he's just like dead staring like into the TV, like watching George like burn. So poor George was like dealt bad luck, but was like fighting to get back out of it, and he was like getting out of it, and then he got more bad luck, and now he's out. And now this is George, Alex, and Charles. Is the Monaco witch like targeting under 25s? They're very youthful. Why is everyone just like out? Back in the race though, Checo is like overtaking like a maniac, and I love when he's on one. Like, you know, that mood that Checo gets in where he, especially when he starts in the back, like he does not take that sitting down. So like by this point he's already in P9 and he started P20. That's like insane. It's also during this time that Bono gets on the radio to tell Lewis that Fernando is trying to trick him into increasing his pace and like to ruin his tires and to give Fernando like a chance to overtake. But Lewis doesn't fall for it. He doesn't need Bono to tell him not to fall for it. Lewis knows Fernando and his mind games, and he's not buying it. But I just love that Fernando has mind games. I just love that that's how he thinks. Basically at this point everything seems to be going pretty great. Lando, Pierre, Lewis all having pretty great races. And then shit hits the fan. Or more specifically, Kevin Magnussen hits the wall and his tire just like flies off. And at first there's a yellow flag and then like maybe a safety car, but then there was a red flag. And guys, at this point I was ready to die. I was like way past my bedtime. I literally rather get up at 4 and watch this than like try to make sense of what's going on in the middle of the night. But anyways, I was dying, and I wasn't the only one disappointed by the FIA being unable to just like pick up a wheel off the track. Like all of the radios were just enraged. Max literally went, "What the fuck? Why?" Fernando went, "What?" Lewis, on the other hand, he's like there to work. His immediate reaction was, "Will they restart?" Because, oh, by the way, I like did not mention this, but we have 2 laps to go. So his question, will they restart, was very valid. But I just like that everyone was complaining and like whining, and Lewis was like, "So what's next? When are we driving again?" Um, but yeah, the fact that there's 2 laps to go and we're pausing for this nonsense is like the worst thing ever. So, as we go into the second red flag of the day, our DNF count has now increased to 4. Charles, Alex, George, and Kevin are out of the race. So, during the second red flag, we got some like nature documentary content. Like, Pierre was having a snack in the car. George, who had changed into jeans and sunglasses, was just like having a chat with Daniel in the pit lane. Alex looks like he just wants to go home. Alex doesn't want to be there anymore. Anyway, so surely this must have been the last red flag of the race, and we're restarting for the last time because there's 2 laps left. By the way, I've got to say Max's starts are getting better and better. Um, I'm so glad he's had this time to practice. But anyway, not even a lap in, like 8 million things happened. And I've rewatched this like 10 times, by the way, and I've tried to process it, but at this point, I'm just going to list all of the things that happened. Not necessarily the cause and effect or the chronological order, because I've given up trying to connect those dots. But this is, in essence, all that happened within like 15 seconds. So Lewis attempted an overtake on Max, but Max defended and they've retained their positions 1-2. Carlos somehow accidentally clipped Fernando going into turn 1, which sent Fernando spinning out. Later, Lance somehow slid wide into turn 3 and ended up in the gravel. Pierre, I guess, who was trying to avoid some of the collisions, ended up on the grass, but like on his way there, scooped up Esteban and they collided into each other and both ended up in the wall. Also, then Checo somehow ended up in the gravel. And also, Logan like butt tapped Nick DeVries, which put them both out of the race. So obviously, the race is immediately red flagged, and I've got to be honest, this one makes the most sense out of all the other red flags. Because at least like this time, it's not just gravel that needs to be swept up. There's like 15 cars that need to be swept up. So the new DNF count is as follows: Charles, Alex, George, Kevin, Pierre, Esteban, Nick DeVries, and Logan Sargent. 8 DNFs. So now we're in our third red flag, and there's like some decisions that need to be made. So if we take all of the DNFs and the people who got damaged that fell back on the grid into account at the moment of the red flag, the order is now as follows: Max, Lewis, Carlos, Nico, Yuki, Lando, Oscar, Guan Yu, Valtteri, Checo, Fernando, and Lance Stroll. So they basically need to figure out if the drivers like finish the sector, which gives the stews basically 4 options. They can decide that the race will not be restarted and the classification is how they came into the pits. They can decide it will not be restarted but will retain the order that they started the restart with. They will restart with the original starting order. They will restart with the current starting order. If it is restarted though, there will be no racing. It'll just be a formation lap and then the checker flag. The reactions during this red flag are just wild, like the way people are spending their time. Lewis is just like stretching in the garage by himself. Both Checo and Max are talking animatedly at the pit wall. Fernando's pissed AF. Like when he was in the car, he got on the radio to tell them like which rules to check. Like he's always thinking. He's like, we didn't finish a lap. We have to go back to the positions we started the restart with. Like he's angry, but he's already problem solving. Whereas most drivers would just be stewing on the radio, and the engineer would just be like, understood. Meanwhile, Fernando's engineers are like taking notes. Once he's out of the car, though, he's also at the pit wall talking very intently with engineers. Lance is at the pit wall too, but he seems to be chilling. Like, he seems not bothered. Lawrence is also there, and he's, like, laughing around, like, fist bumps Lance, which is a sweet moment, but also, is that painful for Lance? Is fist bump the best way to greet your son with freshly broken wrists? Um, anyway, the Strolls are just like in great spirits, and Fernando is like pretty like he doesn't seem like angry or like fuming. He's not necessarily like jumping for joy and laughing, but he's like relatively calm. We don't get much on Pierre and Esteban other than Otmar saying it's a shame given how well Pierre was doing. And honestly, I don't think we're gonna get a warmer relationship from them. Like Esteban said that Pierre apologized to him, which I'm sure he did, and even though it was Pierre's fault, like I don't think it's going to make him any nicer to poor like Esty Bestie. Like in Pierre's mind, he's probably blaming Esteban. And Carlos is just like in his car. He's not getting out. I know he said before that he doesn't like to get out of the car if he can avoid it, but he because it like takes him out of the zone. But he might also be a bit nervous since he was kind of like the first domino to like trigger everything. I will return to Carlos in a moment, but we did get word at this point that race control had decided that the race will restart in the original order with the cars that can drive under their own power. That basically means that since the cars had not gone through the first sector on the track before the red flag came out, the FIA has no reference point on that lap to establish order, so they have to go back to the previous order, which can determine the unestablished order basically. But what that means is that this lap that happened is basically deleted. Like it didn't happen. So the new lineup is Max, Lewis, Fernando, Carlos, Lance, Checo, Lando, Nico, Oscar, Guan Yu, Yuki, and Valtteri. There's like a lot of losers from this reversal. The McLarens are lower down, and Nico, who was in fourth at the beginning of the red flag, is now back to seventh, which makes Haas understandably pissed. The true and only really winner of this scenario was Fernando, who gets his third place back when he was going to be starting in like 11th. And as it turned out, the actual loser in all of this is Carlos, who before the red flag was over, got issued a 5-second penalty and some penalty points. But since there's only one lap left, 5 seconds will be deducted from his final time, giving him no chance to fight for that position. But it does give an opportunity to all the other drivers behind him to basically like squash together as close as possible to push Carlos as far back down the classification as they can. First of all, this call doesn't make any sense because they just canceled this lap. Like, if everything is reverted to pre restart, like specifically for the cars that can still race, then Carlos shouldn't get a penalty because it didn't happen. And even if he was deserving of a penalty, they should have definitely waited to issue it after the race, which was literally just like a lap away. Not only would it give them like an opportunity to speak to Carlos, but as like Jensen Button put it, like it's potentially creating a dangerous situation as every car tries to get as close to Carlos as possible. But truly, the most devastating part out of all of this was Carlos' radio, which I always wonder if they're showing us the person as they're on the radio, but there was like no doubt about it this time. Carlos's eyes, like the shaking of the head, the flailing of the arms, like we were definitely watching him talk live, and it just broke my heart. I'm not gonna play it because I can't bear to hear his voice again, but the radio was um no, it cannot be, Ricky. Do I deserve to be out of the points? No, no. To which Ricky interjects, yup. And then Carlos continues, it's unacceptable. Tell them they need to wait until the race is finished and discuss with me. And Ricky goes, copy. Carlos continues, no, please ask them. Please, 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 to wait and discuss with me. Clearly, the penalty is not deserved. It is too severe. Please, guys, do something. Please, I cannot still believe it. We are P3 and P4, and they want to take me out of the points for that. For a lap one incident, so unfair. I cannot believe they do this to me. Ricky says, "It's clear, Carlos. It's clear. Let's finish the race, and then we'll see." Carlos goes, well, let me at least discuss with the stewards in the stewards room. And Ricky goes, of course. We will go and see them just like after you get out of the car. And then Carlos just put his visor down, and that just made me even more upset. If I'm honest, Ricky is not much better than Javi, Charles's engineer. Like, and also all I'm imagining is Ricky Bobby, and this Ricky does not sound any more competent than Ricky Bobby. It was just like this entire radio was so heartbreaking. Like he's literally in tears, he's choking up, and Ricky just fucking goes, "Yep," and copy. Like it's so bad. I've never heard Carlos plead in that way. I can't get over how sad it was. It like might be equal, if not more heartbreaking than like Charles's no radio call. And I don't know if it's just because I'm used to Charles's heartbreaking on the radio, but like this pleading was very hard to hear. And it wasn't deserved, especially because they decided to delete the lap. Okay, so the restart is basically like a farce. They're literally doing one lap behind the safety car, and then when the safety car goes in, they just cross the finish line under the checkered flag. No overtaking, nothing. It's literally just for the sake of having 58 laps completed. And then that's it. The race is over. You think that nothing could happen during this time, but Nico Hulkenberg's car somehow dies. Luckily, he had already crossed the finish line into seventh, but he wasn't able to make it to the pit lane. So it, in theory, caused another red flag. Like, technically the race was over, so people are only counting the 3 red flags. But technically speaking, there were 4. I don't know why the Stews bothered to even, like, hit the red flag button since the race was over, but they did. They just can't stop themselves. And then, obviously, all the cars smushed together. Carlos stood no chance of maintaining his 4th place position and shot down to 12th, which is insane to me. Like he was set up to go down to 12th. It was unfair. um so post race, Carlos was in the media pen, but like literally out of obligation. He could barely say a word. His response was literally, "I'm not going to speak or comment on it until I go to the stewards and they reverse this penalty, because it's the biggest disgrace of the sport that I have seen in many, many years, and whatever I want to say now, I prefer not to say. I am going to the stewards, but I had to come here first." Okay, full honesty, this was not the biggest disgrace the sport has ever seen, but it was not a good call, and it was extremely unfair to Carlos. I've literally never heard him this upset anywhere. Like, we've seen Carlos in his feelings. He spends a lot of time there. Like, he's always thinking, he's always, like, solemn after a race, but, like, this is not even comparable. My heart just broke hearing him on the radio. It broke seeing him after. It was just unfair. And even Fernando said that Carlos's penalty is too harsh because it's, like, super hard to judge on the beginning of lap 1 because no one is intentionally going to go into another car. And although obviously Fernando might be singing a different tune since he was able to keep his 3rd position, and he might be saying something different if he had been forced to take 11th, I think this is probably the truth, though. It was like too harsh for Carlos. Also, I have to mention this because I'm like kicking myself that I didn't think of it myself, but Connor Sketches did a bit on the driver's post Australian Grand Prix, and his Carlos, when he was talking to the press, his Carlos says, "There was something in my line of sight. The sun was bright. Fernando." Which might honestly be the best thing I've ever heard. One of the best parts of all this post race stuff is Lewis and Fernando. Everyone was like hyping up this rivalry all day long, and sure, like they want to beat each other, but it doesn't seem like the same sort of negative energy that we saw last year when they were shit talking each other. Like, I don't think that's really the vibe anymore. I think they were both on such a high from this race and from battling with each other that they were just like singing each other's praises. Fernando's quote after the race was, "It wasn't an easy race. Keeping up with the Mercedes was difficult, and Ferrari and Alpine were also trying to put pressure from behind. So I tried to force Lewis to make a mistake, but he rode fantastic, the champion that he is. I only remember a lockup on turn 13 in 58 laps. It wasn't possible to do more." First of all, how does Fernando remember the turn Lewis locked up on? Second of all, they just have like mad respect for each other. I think it might be different if they were like regularly competing with each other, but I did love seeing them like this. And they were also sat together in the cool down room and just like chattering away about the race and like enjoying each other's company. It was nice to see. I did feel bad because Max came in and he clearly felt awkward to like join in and talk, but like again, the thing about Max is he loves an analysis. Like the commentators did describe him as the calmest thing on 2 legs, which he is in terms of like racing mentality and like emotionally. But Max is like dying to talk shop, like at all times. Anytime he can like discuss fervently what just happened, he just like needs to. I kind of love that, like, when Fernando asked him a question, Max literally jumped in, like, talking a mile a minute, trying to give all his thoughts. And I just, like, I love seeing that side of Max. It's kind of, like, really cute and geeky. And that theme sort of carried on in the post-race press conference. Like, first, Max was the only one still in his suit. Lewis is wearing full Timberlands and, like, cashmere pants, and, like, Fernando is in his jeans, and they're, like, both ready to GTFO. But, like, this was like also evident that like when Max was trying to answer a question, Fernando literally interrupts him to move things along and to answer faster. And Max just like laughs. He's like, oh, they want me to hurry up. And then the next question he gets, he like pauses for a second and goes, yes. And then turns to Fernando, like, how is that? Also, a great quote from that press conference was Fernando talking about how he has had contact at every start this season. And he was like, actually, I think Jeddah was the only normal start. And Max goes, everyone keeps touching you. And Fernando goes, yeah, I'm really attractive out there. All right, moving on. The driver of the day. So the official driver of the day was Checo because dude started P20, made up to P7, and then because of all this stuff that happened in the last chunk of the race, ended up P5. And like I would agree, he is driver of the day. He gave an insane performance. It's like Checo at his best. But a few honorable mentions. George for his overtake into first after the very first start. Max for improving on his starts throughout the day. It's rare to someone gets like 4 chances to make something better, so I'll have to see it. Also, Fernando preying on Lewis the entire race, and Lewis never giving in. Speaking of them, though, I want to shout out both Fernando and Lewis, like beyond the track. Like they both had great performance, but I wouldn't necessarily say they were exceptional enough to warrant driver of the day. But I do think that their vibes today just like gives them persons of the day. Like first Fernando, I saw someone say that Aston's biggest success this year is running a marketing campaign to make Fernando likable and that it's working. And now I don't know if I've just been influenced or if I actually love Fernando, but every story I hear about him makes me love him more and more. Maybe it's because I like wasn't around F1 at the height of his career when he was like a flaming asshole and leaving nothing but like fractured relationships and broken cars in his wake. Or maybe he's just matured and has found a way to like be the anti-hero rather than an antagonist. But like whatever the reason is, every day I find myself more and more obsessed with him. Like this weekend alone gave me so many new Fernando things to love. Like, during the third red flag, everyone was going to their cars and Fernando is just like wheeling a giant stack of tires through the pit lane, like behind his mechanics. Like what? Why? It was at this moment though that the commentators mentioned that Fernando is a quote unquote man of the people because he wished Jimmy the Tire Man a happy 60th birthday. And also apparently he took the team out for dinner while they were in Australia, which is just such wholesome vibes from Fernando. And also during the team principal conferences, Mike Crack also talked about how Fernando works really, really hard. He's there earlier than most and then leaves later than most. So he's like leading by example and setting like a precedent for everyone else. And also because he's working so hard, it makes everyone else want to work so hard because they love him and they want to help him win. Mike Crack also got a little offended when he was asked about Fernando's age getting in the way, and he was like, I don't like to talk about age. I also don't like to talk about mine age, but like all that matters is that you keep yourself fit and it also matters what your desires are. And Fernando's got both, and Mike's like, we can only pray that we give him the car that he deserves because his age really doesn't matter. Also, I just like love how inspirational Fernando is. Like I'm still not over what an incredible fit Aston Martin is for him. Like I love it so much and I just can't wait to see him flourish this season. It's just so it's a great place for him. Also complete side note, but it turns out Mike Crack is Luxembourgish. There's like 20 people from there and Mike Crack is one of them. I thought he was German or French. And then I looked it up, and the national languages in Luxembourg are Luxembourgish, French, and German. So I guess that checks out. And then my second person of the day, Lewis. So like honestly, after qualifying third yesterday, Lewis went into this race with like this hunger and this mentality that we have not seen from him in a long time. Like he was so amped up and almost like impatient to like do something. I mean, this like all in a good way. Like it was just nice to see him not sad. I also feel like there was a vibe from him that was sort of reminiscent of Lewis during his winning streak, like pre-Abu Dhabi 2021, which is complain incessantly on the radio when everything is actually going well. Like, honestly, Lewis wouldn't shut up on the radio today, and he was like always whining, but he was still always like performing. And like every red flag, as soon as he got out of the car, there was no more complaining. He was like amped up and excited and ready for the plan, and it was just like he's ready to go. Also during the last red flag, I think I mentioned this, but he was literally just stretching all over the paddock. He had AirPods on and was just folding himself in half. Like, how is he that flexible? It was just everyone else is like anxiously eating or talking to engineers or even just like chilling, but Lewis was stretching. The dude is almost 40. He was literally folded in half, and that's just insane. I also loved his energy after the race. I loved it so much I almost didn't cringe when he said thank you to everyone back at the factory. I did cringe, but less. Less than normal. He was just thrilled. He was having the best time. Like, the difference between him and Max was stark. Max, who seemed tired from this day and how long it took to get a win, compared to Lewis, who was just overjoyed. Honestly, his vibe was like a mixture of being ecstatic and relieved, and it was so nice to see him that way, and I hope he's like re-energized and keeps this momentum going into the rest of the season. And obviously, like, let's hope the car continues to suck less, but it's good to have a winning mentality. So the dick in the box is a bit hard to allocate to a driver because nothing really seemed to be a driver's fault. Like, everything was deemed a racing incident except for the Carlos thing, which I found so dumb that I couldn't possibly make Carlos the dick in the box. So I think the true culprit at the Australian Grand Prix was the gravel. Like, is there a better option that doesn't require a red flag so some dude can like sweep the track with a broom every time? Like, surely there's an alternative. And also the FIA is a dick in the box for like almost being consistent, but then still no. Like, everyone got mad last week because they gave a verdict like 3 hours too late and then reversed the verdict. So this time they were like way too fucking hasty with a verdict that was definitely an extenuating circumstance. And also the verdict didn't make sense because even if Carlos was at fault, they canceled the lap. They time turned that shit. They took a time turner and they turned it back. They can't punish him for something that didn't happen, right? Or like at the very least, like, don't create a situation where all the drivers try to squash up against Carlos for a lap. Like, this is an incident that occurred in the last lap, not like in lap 20 or whatever, like it was with Fernando last week. And also, there wasn't like a podium at stake here, so it wasn't like that urgent. Like, you could have paused, spoke to Carlos, like done something to not be an asshole. But like, they just can't help themselves. Okay, so some outstanding questions that I still have after a very chaotic Australian Grand Prix that I will now probably ruminate over for the next 4 weeks until the next Grand Prix. 1, will the FIA learn to communicate their rules and just like, will they learn to communicate in general? In other words, will the FIA stop being an asshole? 2, is Mercedes back? 3, how is Lewis that flexible? Is it because he's vegan? Was it because of Angela? How does he maintain that flexibility? 4, can McLaren score points without half of the grid DNFing? 5, is Checo delusional, or will the team support him in becoming a world champion? 6, are grid-wide funky pants exclusive to Melbourne, or will they carry over to Azerbaijan? 7, will Jack Doohan be enough of a barrier between Esti Besti and Pierre, or will Alpine have to take more drastic measures for future marketing content? 8, will Ferrari give us one weekend without a tragic radio message, please? Maybe, like, the first step is getting rid of Javi and Ricky. They seem to be quite a problem. This is only the communication part. Ferrari has a bunch of problems, but communication-wise, could that be the first step? Should we just get Fred on the radio every week? I feel like he could bring some levity to the situation, although maybe that's not what we want when things are falling apart. Anyway, something to think about. Results. So the final results, in case you got confused, were Max, Lewis, Fernando, Lance, Checo, Lando, Nico, Oscar, Guan Yu, Yuki, Valtteri, and Carlos. And the DNFs were Pierre, Esteban, Nick, Logan, Kevin, George, Alex, and Charles. The standings at the moment are Max with 69 points, Checo with 54 points, Fernando with 45 points, Lewis with 38 points, and Carlos and Lance both with 20. The most tragic thing in all of this is that Charles is 10th with 6 points. Lando has more points than Charles. Poor guy. The constructor standings are Red Bull, Aston, Mercedes, and Ferrari. But let's remember there's only been 3 races. Max and Fernando have had podiums every time, and Checo has had 2. Everything can still completely change, especially if the Mercedes success today was just like a one-off. Or especially if it wasn't a one-off, and then things could really just like go crazy up there. Okay, well, that's it for the Australian Grand Prix. We've got 4 weeks until the next race in Baku. I'll definitely try to get an episode in before then, but I will for sure be active on socials, sharing all of the comments, posts, drama happening on there with the drivers. So make sure you're following at BoxBoxF1Pod, and don't forget to subscribe, review, and share with any potential boxes. See y'all soon, Box Box.